On Christmas Eve, my daughter walked through the door and looked me in the eye and said coldly, "I'm spending Christmas with Mom and my stepfather. I need a real father, not a failure like you." I didn't argue or ask her to stay. After she left, I quietly accepted the transfer to Dubai that I had rejected for years because I never wanted to leave her behind. 1 week later, she returned home expecting everything to be exactly as she had left it. But the moment she stepped inside, her face went pale. Seconds later, she grabbed her phone and called me in a panic. Before we go further, I'm grateful you're here on Dad Family Revenge. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country are you watching from. I read every single one. A quick note. This story includes fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but everything it's trying to say to you is worth hearing. My name is Victor Hale. I am 63 years old. And on Christmas night, my daughter looked me in the eye and told the entire internet that I was a failure. I had been cooking since noon. A whole roasted chicken seasoned, the way Megan liked it, rosemary garlic, a little lemon under the skin, homemade apple pie edges a touch too dark because I had been watching the driveway instead of the oven. The small dining table was set with 2 plates, 2 glasses, and a candle I had found in the back of a kitchen drawer. On the chair beside mine sat a Christmas gift wrapped in red paper, the same red paper Megan had loved since she was a little girl. I had been waiting since 4 o'clock. At 8:15, headlights swept across the living room wall. I straightened up, checked the oven, and walked toward the front door. My chest felt warm in a way it only did when Megan was about to walk in. Then I heard the laughter. Not Megan's laugh, I would have recognized that anywhere. These were other voices. Young, loud, and underneath them a faint, steady sound I couldn't place at first. The sound of a phone camera. Recording. Megan pushed open this door. She was wearing a cream-colored coat I had never seen before. Cashmere by the look of it, the kind that costs more than my weekly paycheck. Behind her came 2 young women I didn't recognize, both holding their phones up, both grinning at their screens. "Hey, sweetheart," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Merry Christmas. Dinner's ready. I made the chicken you like." Megan didn't answer me right away. She stepped into the living room and looked around slowly, the way a person looks at a place they're seeing for the first time. Her eyes moved across the second-hand couch, the scuffed baseboards, the string of Christmas lights I had hung along the windowsill. Then her gaze landed on me, on my flannel shirt, on my hands still faintly stained with the motor oil that never quite washed out anymore. She raised her phone and pointed it at my face. "This is my dad," she said to the screen, her voice light and bright, the way it gets when she's performing. 63 years old, still patching pipes and changing light bulbs for a living. He always told me money doesn't matter. She tilted her head. Probably because he's never really had any. Her friends laughed. One of them moved to get a better angle. My chest tightened a slow, deep pressure, like something behind my ribs was being compressed by a fist. I kept my face still. I had learned that a long time ago. "Megan," I said quietly, "why don't we put the phones away and sit down? The food's getting cold." In a second, Dad. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was reading something on her screen, her lips curving upward. Then she turned the phone around so her friends could see. "Oh, Damien just commented." One of the girls leaned in and read it aloud, giggling. "A man who can't provide for himself can't teach anyone how to live." The words hit me somewhere low and solid. Damien Cross, Megan's stepfather, Laura's new husband, was watching this. In real time. He had been waiting for it. This wasn't spontaneous. This had been planned. Megan set the phone down on the arm of the couch, still recording, and looked at me directly for the first time since she'd walked in. "Dad, I'm moving out," she said. "I'm going to live with Mom and Damien." The room felt like it tilted slightly. "Megan, this is your home. We've built something here." "We haven't built anything, Dad." Her voice was patient in a way that was worse than anger. "You have a couch that's older than I am, and a truck with 200,000 miles on it. Damien has a penthouse downtown. He has connections, influence, a future to offer me." She picked up the phone again. "I need someone who can actually give me a life. Not—" She gestured at the room at me, "this." My hands felt heavy at my sides. I looked at the red-wrapped gift on the chair. She hadn't even glanced at it. "Is this really what you want?" I asked. "Yes." She picked up the small bag she had brought with her. Her suitcase was already packed in the car outside. "Please don't call me Dad. Don't text. I don't want to feel guilty about this." She walked out. Her friends followed. The door closed. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long moment. The candle was still burning. The chicken was going cold. The gift in the red paper sat untouched on the chair. I reached over and turned off the oven. Then I walked to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in months. The folder was old. The edges had gone soft from years of being opened and closed, and the tab on top was written in my own handwriting, small, careful letters that I barely recognized as mine anymore. Offers. I sat down at the desk and opened it. The first page was a letter on company letterhead. Heavy paper embossed logo. A firm in Stuttgart, Germany. They had found me through a paper I published on thermal load distribution in high-density structures. The offer was $310,000 a year plus relocation, plus full research funding. At the bottom in the margin I had written 4 words in pencil. "Megan starts school Monday." I set it aside and looked at the next one. Toyota's North American Engineering Division. $420,000 a year. A team of 12. A dedicated lab. The kind of position that gets written up in trade journals. In the margin, the same pencil, though the same handwriting. Her recital is Friday. Can't miss it. I kept going. A firm in Dusseldorf. A research consortium in Osaka. A private energy group out of Houston that had tracked down my second patent and wanted to license it and hire me to develop the third. Each letter was different. Each offer was larger than the last, and in the margin of every single one a note, a reason, a name. Megan had a nightmare last night. Not the right time. Can't leave. She needs stability right now. Can't leave. I closed the folder and pressed my palms flat against the desk. The house was very quiet. Outside, snow had started. I could hear the particular silence that comes with it, the way the city muffles itself when the first flakes fall. 17 years ago, I had been a different man. I had a lab. I had a team. I had 3 patents to my name by the time I was 40, and a reputation in sustainable energy systems that had taken me a decade to build. When Laura and I divorced when she left to be with Damien and his penthouse and his hand-tailored suits, she didn't ask for custody of Megan. She said her new life was too demanding, too much travel, too many obligations. I remembered standing in the hallway of our old apartment. Megan's hand in mine, her fingers curled tight around 2 of my knuckles, the way she always did when she was scared. She was 6 years old. She looked up at me and said, "You're not going to leave too, are you, Daddy?" My throat tightened just remembering it. Even now, sitting alone in a dark house on Christmas night, the memory of her voice asking that question made my eyes burn. No, I had told her, I'm not going anywhere, and I hadn't. I had meant every word. I quit the research position. I took a job managing building maintenance at an apartment complex 10 minutes from Megan's school. A job that paid less in a year than those letters were offering in a month. I drove her to school every morning. I sat in the back row of every school play, every choir concert, every parent-teacher conference. When she was 15 and had appendicitis, I sat outside the operating room for 14 hours straight and drank 3 cups of bad hospital coffee and didn't once think about leaving. And when she got into a good university, a private one with tuition, that made my stomach drop, I took out a loan. $92,000. I signed the papers alone in a bank office that smelled like carpet cleaner, and I told myself it was fine. She would never have to start her adult life buried in student debt. I would carry it instead. She never knew. Laura always put Damien's name on the things that cost money, the birthday gifts, the holiday packages, the expensive things that showed up at Megan's apartment wrapped in tissue paper. I never corrected her. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as Megan was taken care of. Sitting at my desk now, I wondered if I had been wrong about that. I opened my laptop. The inbox loaded slowly. The old machine took its time. Near the top, marked with a red flag I had added 6 weeks ago, and then ignored, was an email from Marcus Vance. The subject line read, "Final offer, please read Victor." Marcus had been reaching out for 4 years. He ran Meridian Urban Systems, a development firm based in Dubai, building what he called the most ambitious urban energy project in the Middle East. 12 towers, a hospital, a transit network, all running on a unified smart grid. He needed someone to design the energy backbone. He had decided, for reasons I still didn't fully understand, that the someone he needed was me. The salary in this final offer was $520,000 a year. There was housing. There were equity shares. There was a line at the bottom of the email that said, "We will wait as long as it takes." But I must be honest. This is the last time I can hold the position. I had read that email 4 times in 6 weeks and closed the laptop each time without answering. Tonight, I read it a 5th time. Then I looked at the chair across the room, the one where I had placed the red-wrapped Christmas gift. The one Megan hadn't looked at once. I looked at it for a long time, my jaw tight, something heavy and aching, pressing against the inside of my chest. Then I looked back at the screen. For the first time in 15 years, I had no reason left to say no. I typed 3 words. I accept. Victor. My finger hovered over the send button for 4 seconds. I counted them. Then I pressed it, and 15 years of saying no became in a single keystroke a thing of the past. I exhaled slowly. My hands were steady. My heart was not racing. I had expected guilt or grief or the vertigo that comes with a decision you cannot undo. Instead, I felt something quieter. Relief. I stood and walked to the kitchen. Put the kettle on. Stood at the counter staring at the red-wrapped gift, still sitting on the dining chair, the hardcover book on structural engineering. I had found in a used bookstore 3 months ago, bought because Megan had told me once, years ago, that she liked the way engineers thought about problems. That was before Damien. Before the penthouse and the cashmere coat and the friends with the cameras. I picked it up, set it back down. Then I went to the hall closet and pulled out the wooden box from the top shelf. I had built it myself years ago, from cedar left over from a deck repair job. Small, 12 inches long, 8 wide, clean dovetail joints, a simple brass latch. I had made it without any particular purpose. Some things you build because you need to keep your hands busy. Now I knew what it was for. I carried it to the desk and filled it carefully. The patent certificates first. 3 of them, heavy paper with official seals. I smoothed each one flat before placing it inside. Then the folder, all 4 rejection letters with their embossed letterheads. The marginal notes in my own fading pencil still legible in the lamplight. Can't leave. Her recital is Friday. Megan had a nightmare last night. Then the photograph. Megan at 6, asleep against my shoulder at SeaTac, her small hand gripping my collar even in sleep. A stranger had mailed it to us afterward. I had kept it in my desk drawer for 17 years. Then 6 years of bank statements, paper clipped together. The same monthly payment never late applied to a $92,000 loan with my name on it. Last I placed my wristwatch on top of everything. Stainless steel worn leather strap, a small scratch across the crystal I had never bothered fixing. I had worn it the morning I signed the loan papers, the morning I dropped Megan off for her first day of college. The night I sat outside the emergency room for 14 hours. I closed the box but did not latch it yet. I took a marker and wrote on the lid, "For Megan, open when you're ready to see the truth." Then I latched it and carried it to the truck. At 6:30 I drove to the Elmwood complex. Gary was still in the maintenance office. He worked late on Christmas when the building was quiet, always had. The light in the office window was the only one on in the whole parking lot. I knocked once and pushed the door open. He looked at the box, then at my face, and something shifted in his expression, not surprise but recognition. The kind that comes from watching someone for a long time and knowing before they say a word what they've finally decided. "You finally said yes," he said. "I finally said yes." He set down his coffee and led me out of the office, without another word, down the side corridor and through the steel door to the storage level below the building. It was cooler down here and quiet in the way of places that don't see much foot traffic. Concrete floors, fluorescent tubes in wire cages buzzing faintly overhead, the smell of cedar and settled dust. He walked me past the row of unit doors to the one at the far end. He unlocked the outer door with his master key and held it open. I went in. A single pull-chain bulb. Bare walls. I set the box down in the center of the floor in the circle of light and stood there looking at it for a moment. The lid. The handwriting. The words I had written for someone who wasn't ready to read them yet. Then I came back out and handed Gary the small key. "If Megan ever comes looking," I said, "only if she comes to you, give her this." Gary held the key in his palm and looked at it, then looked at me. He was 64 years old and had raised 3 daughters of his own, and I could see he understood exactly what I was asking. Not just to hold a key, but to hold the line between her and the truth until she was strong enough to face it. "I'll keep it as long as it takes," he said, his voice rough at the edges. "You take care of yourself over there, Victor." My throat felt thick in a way I hadn't expected. "Thank you, Gary, for everything." He gripped my shoulder once firmly, then let go. I walked back to my truck in the early morning snow. The sky was just beginning to lighten a thin gray line above the rooftops. I sat behind the wheel and looked at the building I had worked in for 12 years. One light still on in the office window. The parking lot empty and white and still. Then I put the truck in gear and drove away. Dubai hit me like a wall of heat and light. I stepped out of the terminal on December 31st, and the air pressed against me like something physical, dry, dense, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel and desert sand baking in the afternoon sun. After 11 years of Seattle winter, my body didn't know what to do with it. I stood on the curb with my 2 bags and just breathed for a moment, feeling the warmth work its way through my jacket, through my shirt, all the way down to something I hadn't realized had gone cold a long time ago. A driver in a white uniform held a sign with my name. I followed him to a black car and watched the city unspool through the window as we drove glass towers catching the late sun, construction cranes against a sky so blue it looked artificial highways, wide and clean and moving fast. Everything about it was large. Everything about it was new. My apartment was on the 19th floor of a building 10 minutes from the Meridian offices. One bedroom, a full kitchen, a window that looked out over a canal lined with palm trees. I set my bags down, stood at that window for a long time, and thought about the view from my house in Seattle. The neighbor's fence, the strip of gray sky above the rooftops, the street where Megan had learned to ride a bike. I pushed the thought away. I was here now. This was the choice I had made. The next morning, Marcus Vance met me in the lobby of the Meridian offices and shook my hand with both of his. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of calm in his face that comes from decades of making large decisions and living with them. "Victor," he said, and the way he said my name like it meant something, like he had been waiting a long time to say it in person, made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. "We are very glad you are finally here." "I'm glad to be here," I said, and I meant it. He took me upstairs to a conference room on the 48th floor, where 30 engineers from 10 different countries were waiting. Some of them I knew by name from published research. A few of them knew mine. When Marcus introduced me, a young engineer in the front row leaned over to the man beside him and said something I couldn't hear, and the other man nodded with an expression I recognized, the look of someone who has read your work and is surprised to find out you're a real person. I had forgotten what that felt like. It felt like standing up straight after years of stooping. Within the first week, I found the problem. The cooling infrastructure for 3 of the 12 towers had been designed with inadequate thermal load tolerance. In the summer months, when outdoor temperatures in Dubai routinely exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit, the system would buckle. Not immediately, not dramatically. But over time, the overload would cascade equipment failures, power interruptions, and in the worst-case scenario, structural stress on the mechanical floors that housed the primary systems. The projected cost of that failure, if it happened after construction was complete, was somewhere north of $90 million. More importantly, it would affect thousands of people living and working in those towers. I spent 13 days barely sleeping. My team and I redesigned the entire thermal distribution network, rerouting the load pathways, adding redundant cooling capacity, recalibrating the tolerances to account for a 115-degree worst case instead of the 105 the original designers had assumed. When we presented the revised plans to the City Council's engineering board, they approved them without a single objection. That evening, Marcus stopped by my office. He set 2 cups of coffee on my desk and sat down across from me. "You know what I noticed about your research the first time I read it 15 years ago," he said. "You always leave extra room in your designs, extra tolerance, extra safety margin." He picked up his cup. "Like you were building for someone who couldn't afford for things to fail." I looked at him across the desk. My throat felt unexpectedly tight. "I suppose I was," I said. Marcus nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something he had already suspected. He didn't push further. That was one of the things I was coming to appreciate about him. He knew when a conversation had said everything it needed to say. After he left, I sat alone in the office and checked my email. There was a notification from my Seattle bank, an automated alert about a recurring transfer. The monthly payment I had been sending to Megan's landlord account, the one that covered her rent without her ever knowing it, came from me. The transfer had been returned. Account not recognized. I stared at the notification for a long time. Something cold moved through my chest, not quite fear, not quite dread. Something quieter and harder. I closed the email and went back to work. Before I tell you what was happening back in Seattle, if you're still here with me, drop Victor in the comments right now. It tells me this story means something to you, and honestly, that means everything to me. A small note. This story contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. If that's not something you're comfortable with, this is a good place to step away. No judgment at all. Months later, when Megan finally told me what had happened back in Seattle, she said it quietly, like she was still deciding how much she was allowed to feel about it. This is what she told me. She went back to his house 1 week after Christmas. She told me later she wasn't sure why, maybe to apologize, maybe just to see if he was still there. She still had her key. She let herself in. The moment she stepped inside, her face went pale. The Christmas lights were unplugged. The candle on the dining table had burned all the way down to nothing. The red-wrapped gift was gone from the chair. But it wasn't those things that stopped her in the doorway, it was everything else. The desk drawer left open and empty, the coat hooks bare, the shelf above the fireplace cleared of the things that had always been there, the framed photograph, the small wooden clock, the folded piece of paper she had never thought to ask about. The house didn't feel like a house someone had left for the night. It felt like a house someone had finished leaving. She called his phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She called again. Same thing. Her hands were shaking when she put the phone back in her pocket. She didn't know yet that he was already 30,000 feet over the Atlantic. Taped to her apartment door was a pay or vacate notice, 14 days to cover 3 months of unpaid rent or surrender the unit. She read it twice. The packing tape was centered perfectly, like whoever put it there had taken their time. The floor shifted under her feet in a way she described to me later as the particular feeling of discovering that something you were certain of had never been certain at all. She called Laura. "Mom," she said, "did you forget to transfer the rent money? The landlord is saying 3 months haven't been paid." The pause on the other end was long enough that her stomach dropped before Laura even spoke. "There have been some complications," Laura said finally, "with Damien's accounts." What Megan found when she drove to the penthouse was a lobby attendant who told her the elevator access had been restricted pending a court order, in the flat, practiced tone of someone who had delivered that sentence several times that week. They met at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Laura looked smaller than Megan remembered. The coat she was wearing was one she'd had for years, not the new ones. Her hands were wrapped around a paper cup like it was the only solid thing in the room. "Cross-development is being investigated," Laura said. "Federal investigators. They're saying Damien misrepresented revenue on 4 consecutive quarterly reports." She took a breath. "The accounts are frozen. All of them." That was when Megan found out about the credit card. 8 months earlier, Damien had handed her a card and told her it was connected to a family account. He'd had her sign a 1-page document, standard paperwork, he said, just for the accountants. She hadn't read it carefully. She should have. What she hadn't known was that the card was linked to a cross-development corporate account structured to show family members as authorized investors. When the federal investigation froze the accounts, her card stopped working along with everything else and the rent. Victor had been paying quietly every month without telling her he had stopped when she walked out on Christmas night. When he stopped, the floor disappeared. "There's something else," Laura said. She told Megan about Damien's idea, about Kyle Stevens, about $350,000. "You want to sue Dad?" The words came out flat. "Damien says he abandoned you." "He didn't abandon me." Her voice cracked. "I told him to leave. I told him not to call me." Laura put her hand over Megan's. Her fingers were cold. Right now, we need to think practically. Damien says your father is just a maintenance man. He'll settle to avoid the embarrassment. Megan looked at her mother's tired face, at the old coat, at the paper cup she was gripping like something solid in a room where everything else was moving. She picked up the pen Kyle Stevens had sent with the preliminary documents. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She signed her name. The ink was barely dry when Damien texted Laura Good. Stevens will file by end of week. Megan put the pen down and stared at her signature. She told me later she sat very still for a long time looking at it. She told herself it was the right thing to do. She told me she didn't believe that. Not even a little. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing load calculations for Tower 7 when my phone buzzed against the desk. I picked it up without looking away from the screen, the way you do when you're deep in a problem and the rest of the world feels distant and manageable. Then I saw the subject line. Legal notice Hale v. to Hale, King County Superior Court. I set the phone down, picked it up again, read it a second time. Then I pushed back from the desk, walked to the window, and stood there looking out at Dubai for a long time. The glass towers, the cranes, the highway arteries running in every direction like something alive. My hands were very still at my sides. My chest was not. The document was 4 pages. I read every word. The claims were breach of a financial support agreement, specifically an alleged verbal commitment Victor had made during the divorce proceedings to provide continued support for Megan until she was financially independent. Willful cessation of that support. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. The plaintiff was Megan Hale. The co-complainant was Laura Cross. The law firm was Bergman and Associates, represented by a Kyle Stevens, whose firm biography described him as specializing in civil settlements and alternative dispute resolution, which was a careful way of saying he made his living pressuring people into paying to make problems go away. The damages sought were $350,000. At the bottom of the last page in the signature block was Megan's name, her handwriting. I recognized the way she formed the capital M. She had learned it from a teacher in 4th grade and never changed it. I put the phone face down on the windowsill. I had known in some quiet part of myself that something like this might come. Not this exactly, not a law, not $350,000, but something. Some consequence of leaving. Some proof that my absence, even an absence that had been invited, even one that had been demanded, would eventually be used against me. What I hadn't expected was how much it would hurt to see her signature. I picked up my phone and called Samuel Edwards. Sam and I had met in the 2nd week of our first year at MIT, 2 exhausted engineering students who had both shown up to the same late-night study session with the same cold cup of coffee and the same look of quiet determination. He had switched to law after his junior year, a decision that had baffled me at the time and made complete sense to me now. He had his own practice in Seattle civil and criminal litigation, and he answered on the 2nd ring. "Victor Hale," he said, with the particular warmth of someone who is genuinely glad to hear from you. "I heard you finally went to Dubai. How's the weather?" "Sam," I said, "I need a lawyer." A beat. Then his voice shifted, same warmth but focused, now pointed. "Talk to me." I told him everything. The Christmas video. Megan leaving. The lawsuit. The figures. I stood at the window and talked for 20 minutes without stopping, and Sam listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always valued about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. I could hear him writing. "All right," he said. "First thing, don't contact Megan. Don't call, don't text, don't email. Not yet. He paused. Second thing, I need you to understand something about this lawsuit. Kyle Stevens doesn't win cases. He wins settlements. His entire model is built on finding defendants who would rather write a check than sit in a courtroom. He's counting on you being that kind of defendant. I'm not, I said. I know you're not. That's why you called me. I heard him flip a page. Now you said Megan posted this Christmas video publicly. It was a live stream. It's still up. Good. That's evidence. Another pause. Victor, I'm going to subpoena the communications between Damian Cross and Laura Cross during the period leading up to this filing. Text records, emails, anything that went through their phones or accounts. In a civil case, discovery gives us broad access. Their lawyer will have to comply. If Cross pushed this lawsuit the way I think he did, we're going to find it in those records. Something loosened slightly in my chest. Not relief, not yet. But the particular steadiness that comes from knowing someone competent is standing in your corner. There's one more thing, I said. I've been paying Megan's rent every month directly to her landlord, not through her. She never saw the transfers. The payment got bounced back last month because the landlord's account information changed and I hadn't been notified. I think that's part of what triggered all this. Sam exhaled slowly. You've been paying her rent without telling her. Yes. And you have bank records showing every payment. 6 years of them. He almost laughed, not at me, but at the particular irony of it. Victor, he said, the man they're accusing of abandonment has been quietly paying his daughter's rent for 6 years without taking any credit for it. I didn't do it for credit. I know, he said. But a judge will hear that very differently than Damian Cross intends. He clicked his pen. Book a flight home. Come in 2 days before the hearing date. We have work to do. I looked out at the Dubai sky one more time. The towers catching the last of the afternoon light. The project I had come here to build still going up, still growing steel and glass, and carefully calculated tolerance. I'll be there, I said. I booked the flight that evening. Then I sat at my desk and opened a blank document and started writing down every name I could think of, every person who had seen me raise Megan, who had watched me show up, who had been there for the things she couldn't remember or had chosen to forget. The list was longer than I expected. Seattle was exactly the way I had left it. Gray, wet, and indifferent to the fact that I had been gone. I landed on a Thursday morning and drove a rental car straight to Sam's office, a narrow brick building on 2nd Avenue, with his name stenciled on the frosted glass door in plain block letters. He was waiting for me in the conference room with 2 cups of coffee, a yellow legal pad, and a binder that was already thick with printed pages. He stood when I walked in and shook my hand firmly. Then he looked at me the way old friends do when they haven't seen you in a while, taking inventory, checking for damage. You look better than I expected, he said. I feel worse than I look, I told him. He almost smiled. Sit down. We have a lot to cover. He opened the binder. The first tab was labeled Discovery Cross Hale Communications. My subpoena had come back 3 days earlier. Sam slid a printed sheet across the table, and I read it without picking it up. The first message was from Damian to Laura, sent 2 days after Christmas. The old man won't dare go to court. He's a maintenance worker. Demand $350 drop to $100 if we have to. He'll pay to make it go away. Men like him always do. The second was from Laura to Damian, sent the same evening. What about Megan? She's hesitating. Damian's reply came 4 minutes later. Megan needs to be the plaintiff. A judge will feel sorry for an abandoned daughter. That's the whole point. Tell her she's not doing anything wrong. I read it twice. My jaw was so tight it ached. Not because I was surprised. I had suspected something like this from the moment I recognized the staging of that Christmas live stream. But seeing it in writing in Damien's own words, laid out in plain black ink on a printed page, that was something different. That was the kind of thing that settles in your chest and stays there. They used her, I said. Yes, Sam said. They did. And she's going to figure that out when those messages appear on a courtroom screen. He closed the binder. But first, let's talk about witnesses. We spent the next 2 hours driving across Seattle. Gary Henderson met us at the Elmwood complex in the same office where I had handed in my keys 3 months earlier. He was under a Dodge pickup when we pulled in, slid out when he heard us, and wiped his hands on a shop rag before he shook Sam's hand. When Sam explained what was happening, Gary's face went very still. "They're suing him," Gary said. Not a question. His voice had dropped about half an octave. "Filing is already in," Sam said. "We need your testimony about his employment history and the job offers he turned down." Gary looked at me. His eyes were red at the edges, and he pressed his lips together hard before he spoke, like he was keeping something back. "Victor," he said, "I watched you turn down Tesla. I watched you turn down a German firm that offered you more money than I'll make in the rest of my life. You told me every time, 'Can't leave, Megan needs me.'" He shook his head, a short, tight movement. "I'll be there. You put me on that stand, and I will tell them everything." Barbara Stone answered her door in a housecoat with a dish towel over her shoulder and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was 68 years old and had lived 2 houses down from me for 12 years, and when Sam finished explaining the situation, she pulled the dish towel off her shoulder and twisted it between her hands with a slow, controlled fury that was more unsettling than shouting would have been. "I was there the night that child had appendicitis," she said, looking directly at me. "You sat outside that emergency room for 14 hours. I brought you coffee at 2 in the morning because you wouldn't leave to get any yourself. You told me you didn't want to be in the parking lot if she woke up scared." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her mouth flat and composed herself. "You tell me when and where, and I will be in that courtroom." Janet Peterson, Megan's former middle and high school principal, agreed to testify by video call. She pulled up her records while we were on the phone with her. 43 parent-teacher conferences, she said. Mr. Hale attended every single one. I have sign-in sheets going back 11 years. A pause. Ms. Cross Laura attended 0 in 8 years. Another pause shorter. I want to be careful how I say this, Mr. Edwards, but in 30 years of education, I have never seen a more consistently present father. Whatever anyone says about Victor Hale, that record speaks for itself. Warren Fields at First National pulled up my loan file before we even sat down. 6 years of statements. Every payment on time, the balance steadily decreasing. He confirmed that the transfers had continued without interruption after I relocated to Dubai, right up until the month the account stopped accepting them. "Never missed a payment," Warren said, tapping the file with one finger. "Not once. Last Sam called Professor James Davenport at his office at MIT. Davenport had supervised my graduate thesis 30 years ago and had spent the decades since sending me job opportunities I never took. He answered on the first ring and listened without interrupting while Sam explained what was needed. 3 formal offers, Davenport said when Sam finished. Each one I personally facilitated. Each one Victor declined. He told me the same thing every time his daughter needed him at home." A pause. "I confess I found it frustrating at the time. Now I find it—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "I'll record whatever statement you need. Just send me the format." By late afternoon, Sam and I were back in his conference room. The binder was open on the table between us and the late light, was coming through the blinds in long, pale strips across the pages. Sam leaned back in his chair and looked at me across the table. "You have a strong case, Victor. Stronger than they know." He tapped the discovery printout. "Stevens received every one of these documents 3 weeks ago, the bank records, the job offer letters, the video, the messages. He's seen all of it. He's betting you won't show up, or that you'll fold when Megan takes the stand. He's built his entire strategy around a man who's too tired or too ashamed to fight back." He tapped the discovery printout. "They built this lawsuit on the assumption that you're still the man fixing boilers for $55 an hour. They have no idea what you've been doing in Dubai. They have no idea what's in that binder." He paused. "Kyle Stevens is going to walk into that courtroom thinking this is a settlement negotiation. It isn't." I looked down at the printed messages, at Damien's words, at the casual confidence of a man who had decided without a moment's hesitation to use his stepdaughter as a legal instrument. "Are you ready to face her?" Sam asked. "In court, across the room." I thought about the Christmas lights still blinking when I drove away, the red-wrapped gift she never looked at, the folder full of letters she never knew existed. "I've been ready," I said, "since she called me a failure on the internet." Sam closed the binder. "Then let's go win this." I had fixed the boiler in a building like this once. 12 years ago, a call came in on a Tuesday morning heating system down King County Administrative Complex, 2nd and Jefferson. I had spent 4 hours in the basement with a wrench and a flashlight, and when I came up the service elevator, I walked through a corridor that smelled exactly like this one. Old wood, floor polish, the particular stillness of a place where consequential things happen and the walls have absorbed all of it. I stood outside courtroom 7 and breathed that smell and told myself it meant nothing. Sam appeared at my elbow with a cup of coffee from the cart in the lobby. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine," I said. He handed me the cup anyway. "You're allowed to not be fine." "I know," I said. "I'm fine." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded once and pushed open the courtroom door. The room was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell. An American flag in the corner slightly crooked on its stand. Judge Patricia Owens's bench was empty. She hadn't come in yet, but the room was already filling. I walked down the center aisle behind Sam, set my binder on the defense table, and pulled out the chair. That was when I saw her. Megan was sitting at the plaintiff's table across the room. She was wearing a dark blazer I didn't recognize, and her hair was pulled back simply. And she was thinner than she had been at Christmas, not just thinner, but different in some harder-to-name way, like something had been taken out of her and not replaced. She had both hands flat on the table in front of her, and she was staring at the judge's bench with the focused blankness of someone who has decided very deliberately not to look anywhere else. Laura sat beside her. She was wearing the older coat, the same one from the coffee shop, I guessed. Her posture was rigid, her makeup careful, her eyes fixed forward. The chair where Damien Cross should have been sitting was empty. Kyle Stevens occupied the far end of the plaintiff's table. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, expensive suit. The kind of confident that comes from winning enough times that losing feels theoretical. He was reviewing notes on a yellow legal pad. And when Sam and I sat down, he glanced over at us with the quick, assessing look of someone calculating odds. Sam leaned close and said quietly, "Damien isn't here." "I see that. His lawyer got a call this morning. Apparently, Damien had become unreachable overnight. Prior commitment, that's what the message said." Sam's expression told me he didn't believe it either. Sam's voice was carefully neutral. "We'll find out what that means shortly." A door opened at the front of the room. Everyone rose. Judge Patricia Owens was 58 years old, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She moved with the economical efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time and had stopped being interested in ceremony. She sat settled, her glasses on her nose, opened the file in front of her, and looked at the room over the top of the frames. "Be seated," she said. Her voice was dry and precise and carried without effort. Case number 2024 CV8472, Hale and Cross versus Hale. She looked at Kyle Stevens. "Counsel for the plaintiffs." Kyle stood, buttoned his jacket, and began. "How was good?" I had to admit that. His voice was measured and sympathetic, and he built the picture carefully, a father who had walked away without warning, who had abandoned his daughter at the lowest point of her life, who had chosen a lucrative overseas position over his family responsibilities and left a vulnerable young woman without financial support or emotional presence. He spoke about Megan's lost apartment, her frozen accounts, the psychological toll of sudden paternal abandonment. He used the word abandonment 7 times. I counted. Then he called Megan to the stand. She walked to the witness box without looking at me. She was sworn in, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. Up close under the courtroom lights, she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from months of sustained anxiety, of waking up every morning, not knowing what the day was going to take from you. Kyle approached the stand. "Ms. Hale, can you describe your situation since your father relocated to Dubai?" Megan took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. The way voices get when someone has rehearsed what they're going to say so many times, it stopped feeling real. "My dad left," she said. "One day he was there and then he was gone. No conversation, no plan, no—" She stopped. Something moved across her face, a flicker of something that wasn't grief and wasn't guilt, but was somewhere between them. She pressed it down. "I lost my apartment. I lost my financial stability. I had nowhere to go and he wasn't there." "Did he contact you after leaving?" "No." "Did he explain his decision?" "No." Kyle nodded slowly, like each answer confirmed something he already knew. "How did that make you feel, Ms. Hale?" Megan's jaw tightened. Her hands pressed harder against each other in her lap. "Like I wasn't worth an explanation," she said. Her voice fractured slightly on the last word, a small, genuine break that was more painful to hear than crying would have been because it wasn't performed. That part was real. I looked at my hands on the table. Kyle turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs contend that Mr. Hale's departure constitutes willful abandonment and intentional withdrawal of financial support, causing direct and measurable harm to Ms. Hale." Judge Owens wrote something on her notepad. Then she looked up directly at me over the top of her glasses. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you've heard the allegations. How do you respond?" I stood up. My chair scraped back against the floor, and the sound of it was very loud in the quiet room. Across the aisle, Megan finally looked at me for the first time since Christmas, her eyes meeting mine directly. Hers were dry. She had decided not to cry in front of me. I understood that. I respected it even now. I reached for the binder on the table and opened it. "Your Honor," I said, "I did not abandon my daughter. Before I show you what appeared on that courtroom screen, before I tell you what Damien had written to Laura in those messages, drop truth in the comments if you're still watching. I need to know you're here for what comes next. Because what comes next changes everything. Note some details in this story are fictional, shaped for the purpose of this narrative. If you'd rather not continue, you're welcome to step away right here." I didn't raise my voice once. Sam had told me the night before that the most dangerous thing I could do in that courtroom was let them make me angry. "The moment you raise your voice," he said, "you become the story. Keep it quiet. Let the paper do the work." I had nodded and told him I understood, and I did understand. But what I hadn't told him was that I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Whatever anger I might have felt had burned off somewhere over the Atlantic on the flight home, and what was left underneath it was something quieter and more durable. I wanted my daughter to know the truth. That was all. Sam stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to present documentary evidence in 4 categories. Judge Owens nodded. Proceed. The first category was financial. Sam placed the bank statements on the projector, 6 years of monthly payments, $942 each, drawn from my personal account, and applied to the $92,000 loan I had taken out for Megan's university tuition. The most recent payment had been processed 41 days ago from Dubai. Mr. Hale, Sam said, turning to me, did you cease financial support of your daughter when you relocated? No, I said. I continued paying the loan I took out for her education, every month, without interruption. And when did you stop the separate monthly transfer you had been making toward her living expenses? When she told me she didn't need me anymore. When she told me not to contact her. I looked at Judge Owens. She's 24 years old. She's an adult. She told me to leave. I left. I didn't stop caring about what happened to her. I just stopped inserting myself where I had been told I wasn't wanted. Kyle shifted in his chair. He was still confident, but the confidence had a slightly different texture now, less settled, more alert. The second category was history. Sam put the 4 letters on the screen. Stuttgart, Toyota, Dusseldorf, the Houston Consortium. Each one with its embossed letterhead, its substantial figures, and in the margin of each photographed and enlarged, so the handwriting was clearly legible, a penciled note, a date, a reason, a name, 4 letters, 4 times he had said no. The courtroom was very still. I watched Megan from across the room. She was staring at the screen. Her hands, which had been pressed flat on the table since the morning, had curled inward, now fingers folding slowly toward her palms. The third category was testimony. Gary went first. He walked to the stand with the particular deliberateness of a man who has decided he is going to say exactly what he means and is not going to be hurried about it. He gripped the railing in front of him with both hands, his knuckles going white, then releasing, then tightening again, and he looked at Judge Owens and told her about the job offers, about the years, about the man he had watched show up day after day for a little girl who needed someone to stay. He's the best father I've ever known, Gary said, his voice rough and low. And I've known a... Barbara Stone took the stand next and looked directly at Megan before she said a single word to the judge, not with accusation, with something more complicated than that, something that was partly grief and partly love, and partly the particular sadness of watching someone you care about make choices that cost them more than they know. 14 hours, Barbara said. Outside the emergency room. I brought him coffee at 2 in the morning because he wouldn't leave to get any himself. Her voice tightened on the next words, and she pushed through them. He told me he didn't want to be in the parking lot if she woke up scared and needed to see a face she recognized. That's who this man is. Janet Peterson's face appeared on the video screen at the front of the room, clear and steady. She read from her records without dramatics. 43 conferences, 11 years of sign-in sheets. Laura Cross, 0 appearances in 8 years. Warren Fields confirmed the loan. Every payment. Never late. The balance still decreasing from a Dubai bank account. Then Sam said, "Your Honor, the defense would like to play a video." Kyle stood. Objection relevance. The video was posted publicly by the plaintiff herself on the evening of December 25, 2023, Sam said. It speaks directly to the question of whether Ms. Hale was abandoned or whether she made a voluntary choice to leave. Judge Owens looked at Kyle over her glasses. Overruled. Proceed. The room went quiet in a specific way, the way it does when everyone knows something important is about to happen, and no one wants to be the one breathing too loudly. Megan's voice came out of the speakers. This is my dad. 63 years old, still fixing pipes and changing light bulbs for a living. I kept my eyes on the table. I didn't need to watch it. I had heard it enough times in my own head. Don't call me to make me feel guilty. Sam stopped the video. He let the silence hold for a moment, long enough for the words to settle, not so long that it felt calculated. Then he turned to Megan on the stand. Ms. Hale, he said, his voice even and unhurried. I have one question. Who first suggested that filing this lawsuit was the right thing to do? Megan's jaw tightened. Her eyes moved not to her mother, not to the empty chair where Damien should have been, but to the table in front of her. She was pressing her thumbnail hard into the wood grain, back and forth, a small, repetitive motion I recognized from when she was a child, working through something she didn't want to say out loud. Ms. Hale, Judge Owens said not unkindly, please answer the question. Megan looked up. Her eyes were bright with something that wasn't quite tears, the particular brightness of someone fighting very hard to keep their face still while something inside them gives way. She looked at her mother. Laura's expression didn't change carefully, deliberately, didn't change in a way that was its own kind of answer. Megan looked back at Sam. Damien Tuck, she said. The word came out barely above a whisper, but the room was quiet enough that everyone heard it clearly. Sam nodded once. He walked to the projector and placed a printed sheet on the display. Damien's messages appeared on the screen, large black text against white, impossible to misread. The old man won't dare go to court. Demand $350 drop to $100. He'll pay to make it go away. Megan needs to be the plaintiff. A judge will feel sorry for an abandoned daughter. Megan stared at the screen. She had seen the messages before Stevens had forwarded them to her 2 weeks ago, a single email with no explanation, just the printout. She had read them once and put her phone face down on the kitchen table and not picked it up again for an hour. But seeing them projected on a courtroom screen in black text, 6 inches tall, in a room full of people, that was something different from reading them alone. The color left her face in a slow, visible wave, starting at her forehead and moving downward, and her hands gripped the railing of the witness stand so hard that her arms were shaking from the effort of it. She turned to look at her mother. Mom. Her voice cracked down the middle of the word. Did you know he wrote that? Laura looked at the table, her mouth pressed into a thin, controlled line. She said nothing, not because she had nothing to say, but because anything she said would make it worse, and some part of her knew that. Mom. Megan's voice broke fully this time, a raw and ragged sound that filled the room. Answer me. Did you know? Laura never answered. She pressed her lips together until they went white, and she looked at the table in front of her, and she kept looking at it, while Megan's question hung in the air of the courtroom and slowly, painfully answered itself. The judge let it go on for 4 full seconds, I know, because I watched the second hand on the clock above the door, and then Judge Owens cleared her throat and moved on. Mr. Edwards, she said. Any further witnesses? Sam stood. 2 more, Your Honor, both appearing remotely. The technician brought up the video connection. The first face that appeared belonged to Professor James Davenport, 70 years old, silver-haired, sitting in his MIT office, surrounded by bookshelves so full that volumes had been stacked horizontally on top of the vertical ones. He bowed slightly when the connection opened, an old habit, then straightened and looked at the camera with the precise, unhurried attention of a man who chose every word deliberately. Kyle Stevens stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to establish the relevance of this witness." "Sit down, Mr. Stevens," Judge Owens said without looking up. "You'll have your opportunity." Kyle sat. Sam walked Davenport through it. The graduate thesis. The research. 3 separate occasions spanning 11 years, when Davenport had facilitated formal job offers from institutions willing to pay substantially for my work. 380,000, 410,000, 460,000, the last one. And on each occasion, Sam said, "What was Mr. Hale's response?" Davenport folded his hands. "He declined. Every time." A pause. "He told me the same thing each time his daughter needed consistency. She had already lost one parent to a life that prioritized other things, and he was not going to be the second." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that sat oddly on his precise face. "I understand it better now." The screen shifted. Marcus Vance appeared, white linen shirt, 48th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, catching the Dubai afternoon light. "Mr. Vance," Sam said, "can you describe your professional relationship with Victor Hale?" "I have been trying to hire him for 4 years," Marcus said. "Meridian reached out in 2020. He declined. 2021. 2022. 2023. A small pause. Every time the answer involved his daughter. I was not willing to be absent from her life. And then he accepted. In December 2023. What did he say to you in your final conversation before he agreed? Marcus reached to the side of his desk and picked up a small notebook, dark cover ribbon marker. He opened it, found the page, and looked at it before he spoke. "I keep notes on important conversations," he said. "I had been waiting 4 years. I did not want to forget." He looked back at the camera. He said, "Marcus, my daughter just told me she doesn't need me anymore. She told me I wasn't good enough. For the first time in 15 years, I have no reason left to say no." Those were his exact words. The courtroom went very quiet. Not performed, quiet, the real kind, where something so precise and painful lands that the body's first response is stillness. My jaw was tight. My eyes were burning in a way I had not permitted myself since Christmas night, and I was not going to permit it now. Not here. Not in front of Kyle Stevens and his yellow legal pad. Across the room, Megan made a sound, very small. A single intake of breath, sharp and involuntary. Her hand came up to her mouth. Her eyes, dry and controlled all day, filled so quickly that the tears spilled before she could blink them back. She was looking at me. For the first time since Christmas, she was looking at me without the blankness, without the script Damien had handed her. Just looking at me, hand over her mouth, tears on her face, and I could see the exact moment she understood. I had not left her. She had told me to go. And I had gone. Those were not the same thing, had never been the same thing. I held her gaze, didn't look away, didn't smile, didn't nod. I just let her see me. Sam turned to the judge. "The defense rests, Your Honor." Judge Owens took her glasses off, rubbed the bridge of her nose, then put them back on and looked at Kyle Stevens. "Counselor," she said, her voice flat and unamused, "does the plaintiff wish to add anything before I render my findings?" Kyle looked at Megan. She was still crying, hand at her mouth, eyes still on me. She was not going to look at Kyle. He looked at Laura. Laura was looking at the table. Kyle set his legal pad squarely in front of him. "No, Your Honor," he said. "The plaintiff has nothing further." Judge Owens put her glasses down on the bench. Not to the side, not pushed up on her forehead. She set them down deliberately in front of her, like she was putting away a tool she no longer needed. Then she looked at the courtroom. Not at me, not at Megan, not at Kyle Stevens with his yellow legal pad and his expensive suit. She looked at the room itself the way you look at something when you're deciding how much of what you're thinking actually needs to be spoken. She picked up her pen, set it down again. "Ms. Hale is 24 years old," she said. Her voice was the same as it had been all day, dry, precise, carrying without effort. "She is a legal adult. She voluntarily left her father's home on the evening of December 25th, 2023. She explicitly, on a public recording that she herself created and distributed, asked her father not to contact her." She paused. "The evidence shows that Mr. Hale continued making payments on a personal loan he took out for her university education after relocating to Dubai. The evidence shows that these payments have not been interrupted once in 6 years." Another pause shorter. "There is no abandonment before this court. There is no financial negligence. There is no intentional infliction of emotional distress." She looked at Megan. "What there is," Judge Owens said, and her voice dropped half a register, not softer, but more direct, "is a father who gave up more than this court has time to fully enumerate, and a daughter who didn't know it." Megan's chin was trembling. She pressed her lips together hard and looked at the surface of the plaintiff's table. "Case dismissed with prejudice," Judge Owens said. She picked up her gavel. "Furthermore, given the demonstrable lack of factual basis for this filing, the court orders the plaintiffs to pay the defendant's legal fees in the amount of $18,500, pursuant to RCW 4.8, 4.010. The gavel came down once clean and final. "We're adjourned." The room began to move. Kyle Stevens stacked his papers with the careful efficiency of a man who had lost before and knew how to leave a room without making it worse. He didn't look at Laura. He didn't look at Megan. He pulled his briefcase from the floor, set it on the table, and began transferring files into it, with the focused attention of someone who has decided the fastest way out is the straightest line. Sam leaned close to me. "That's as clean as it gets," he said quietly. His hand found my shoulder briefly, a single firm press, and then he stepped back to gather his own files. I stood. My legs felt steadier than I expected. I straightened my jacket, picked up the binder lighter now, somehow, as if the weight it had carried into the room had been distributed across the afternoon and was no longer mine alone to hold, and I pushed back my chair. That was when Laura's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Something happened to her face, a rapid, complicated sequence of expressions that moved through shock, and then something colder, and then something that might in a different context have been grief. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping hard against the floor, and she walked out of the courtroom without a word to anyone. Sam told me later that Laura had been interviewed by federal agents 3 times already. She had cooperated, fully handed over emails, account records, everything. In exchange, prosecutors agreed she wouldn't face criminal charges. She hadn't known the full scope of what Damien was doing. That was their conclusion, not mine. Sam leaned close to me later outside on the courthouse steps and told me what the message had been. Federal agents had been tracking Damien Cross for weeks. They had known he might run, but the warrant wasn't finalized until that morning, the kind of timing that happens when federal cases move slower than the people inside them. They had stationed agents at SeaTac before the hearing even began. He had made it as far as the gate before they stopped him. Not to Kyle. Not to Megan. Not to Megan. Megan watched her mother leave. She was still sitting at the plaintiff's table, both hands flat on the surface, and she watched the door swing shut behind Laura with an expression I recognized, the particular look of someone watching a thing they already half knew become fully, undeniably true. Sam touched my arm. Ready? I nodded. I picked up the binder. I walked toward the aisle. Megan's table was between me and the door. I didn't plan what happened next. I didn't decide, it didn't calculate it. I simply walked down the aisle the way I had walked in that morning, and as I passed the plaintiff's table, as I came level with it, close enough to see that Megan's hands on the table were not as steady as she was trying to make them look, that her fingers were pressing down hard to keep from shaking, I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't look down. I moved past her the way the day had moved forward, and without ceremony, and I walked toward the door at the back of the room. My hand was on the door when I heard it. One word, barely above a whisper. Coming from behind me, from the direction of a table where a young woman was sitting alone with her hands pressed flat against the wood in a room that was emptying around her. Dad. I stopped. My hand was still on the door. The wood was cool under my palm. The room smelled like floor polish and the particular exhausted quiet that settles over a courthouse at the end of a long afternoon. I stood there with my back to her for 3 full seconds. Then I turned around. Megan was on her feet. She hadn't come after me. She was standing exactly where I'd left her, beside the plaintiff's table. And she looked the way she had looked at 6 years old, in the middle of the night, in the hallway outside her bedroom, when the nightmares were bad, and she needed to know I was still there. Older, yes. Thinner, yes. The cashmere coat and the designer bag were gone, replaced by a plain dark blazer and the particular stripped-down look of someone who has spent several months losing things they thought were permanent. But the expression on her face, that was the same. That had not changed at all. Her eyes were red. Her chin was still trembling, that small, involuntary movement she had never been able to control, not even as a child. She pressed her hands together in front of her fingers, laced tight knuckles going white. Please, she said. Her voice broke fully on the word, a raw, open sound that filled the emptying room. Please don't go. I looked at her across the courtroom. My chest was very full of something I didn't have a name for, not forgiveness, not yet, not anger either. Something older and more complicated than either of those, something that had been there since the night she was born, and would be there long after this day was forgotten. Come outside, I said. We can talk in the hallway. The hallway outside courtroom 7 was long and fluorescent, and smelled like the inside of every government building I had ever been in. Carpet, cleaner old paper, the faint metallic undertone of recycled air. At this hour, most of the foot traffic had moved on. A few people passed with briefcases and lanyards, glancing at us without curiosity. Whatever was happening between the man in the charcoal suit and the young woman with the red eyes was none of their business, and they knew it, and they kept walking. Megan stopped a few feet from the courtroom door. I stopped a few feet further on and turned to face her. She had stopped crying. Her eyes were still swollen, and her face was still blotchy, and she was holding herself very carefully, the way people do when they're afraid that if they let any part of themselves relax, the whole thing will come apart. Her hands were clasped in front of her fingers, interlaced, squeezing so hard the knuckles had gone past white and into something almost translucent. I didn't know, she said. Her voice was rough from crying, and she didn't try to smooth it out. About the tuition, about the jobs, about any of it. Mom always said she always made it sound like Damien was taking care of things. I never checked. I never thought to check. She pressed her lips together hard, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked down the middle. I never thought to check, Dad. That's the part I can't get past. I just believed what they told me, and I never once looked at the actual truth. I looked at her, my daughter, 24 years old, standing in a courthouse hallway in a plain dark blazer, with no cashmere coat and no designer bag, and no friends with cameras, just herself and whatever she was finding out about herself in this moment. "I need to ask you something," I said. She nodded. Her chin was still doing that small, trembling thing she had never been able to control. "If I really were just a maintenance man," I said. "If there were no patents, no Dubai, no job offers, if everything they said about me in that courtroom were true, and the only thing I had ever been was a man who fixed boilers for $55 an hour." I looked at her steadily. "Would you still be sorry for what you said on Christmas night?" The question landed the way I knew it would. I watched it hit her, watched her face go through something complicated and private. The way faces do when they're working through a question they don't already have the answer to. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the floor. Then she looked at the wall. Then she looked back at me, and her eyes were very bright and very honest and full of something that was not comfortable. "I don't know," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to say yes. I want to tell you that I would have been sorry regardless. But I don't know if that's true yet, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you something I'm not sure of." She swallowed. "I think I need to find out. I think becoming someone who would be sorry no matter what, I think that's something I have to work toward. I'm not there yet." It was the most honest thing she had said to me in years, maybe ever. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. My fingers found the key, small, plain, the kind that could open 100 different padlocks and meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what it unlocked. I held it out to her. She looked at it without taking it. "What is that?" "Gary Henderson," I said. "You remember Gary? He owns the Elmwood complex. I worked there for 12 years. I kept my hand extended, the key flat on my palm. "He's been keeping something for me. A box. I put it together the night you left, and I gave it to him before I flew to Dubai." I paused. "There are things in it you should see. Not because I want you to feel guilty, you're doing enough of that on your own, but because you said you want to find out who you actually are. You can't do that if you're still working with the wrong information." Megan reached out and took the key. Her fingers were cold when they brushed my palm, cold and slightly unsteady, and she curled them around the key and held it against her chest like it was something fragile. "What's in it?" she asked. "Go find out," I said. "Tell Gary I sent you. He'll know what to do." She looked at me. Her eyes searched my face with the particular urgency of someone who wants to ask 100 things and doesn't know which one matters most right now. "And after," she said, "after I look at whatever's in the box, then what?" I buttoned my jacket. "That depends on what you do with what you find." I turned and walked toward the elevator at the end of the hall. My footsteps were steady on the carpet. Behind me I heard nothing, no footsteps following, no voice calling after me. Just the hum of the building doing what buildings do, and the particular silence of someone standing still holding a key trying to figure out what comes next. I didn't look back. This is what Megan told me months later, sitting in a small restaurant in Dubai. She said it quietly, like she was still working out how to say it. She drove to the Elmwood complex on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the courthouse. She had spent those 3 days in a friend's spare room, sleeping badly, and eating worse, turning the key over in her fingers, the way you turn a coin when you're trying to decide something, and you already know the answer, but you're not ready to admit it yet. She thought about calling her father. She picked up the phone twice. Both times she set it back down without dialing, because she didn't know what she would say, and she had made enough mistakes lately by saying things before she understood what they meant. So she drove to Elmwood instead. Gary Henderson was in the parking lot when she pulled in talking to a tenant about a broken gate. He saw her get out of the car and he stopped mid-sentence, said something brief to the tenant, and walked toward her with his hands in his jacket pockets, and his face doing the thing it does when he's working out how to handle a situation carefully. "He said you might come," Gary said. "He told me to," she said. Gary looked at her for a moment, at her face, at the key in her hand, at whatever else he could read there that she wasn't saying out loud. Then he nodded once. "Come on." He led her through a side door down a set of concrete stairs into the storage level below the building. It was cooler down here, and quieter, and it smelled like cedar and dust, and the specific staleness of air that doesn't move much. The overhead lights were the industrial kind, fluorescent tubes in wire cages, and they buzzed faintly as Gary led her past rows of unit doors to the one at the far end. He stopped in front of it, looked at the key in her hand. "You want company," he said. "Or you want to do this alone?" "Alone," she said. "But don't go far." He nodded. He unlocked the outer door with his master key, pushed it open for her, and stepped back into the corridor. She went in. The storage unit was small. Concrete floor, bare walls, a single bulb on a pull chain that she reached up and clicked on. In the center of the floor sat a wooden box 12 inches long, maybe 8 wide, cedar by the smell of it, with clean-cut dovetail joints and a small brass latch. On the lid, in my father's handwriting, large and deliberate, "For Megan, open when you're ready to see the truth." She stood in front of it for a long time. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted it to. Her hands, when she reached down and undid the brass latch, were not entirely steady. She lifted the lid. The patent certificates were on top. 3 of them on heavy paper, with official seals, the kind of document that takes up space in a way that ordinary paper doesn't. She read the names on them. Hybrid Thermal Distribution System. Load Adaptive Cooling Architecture. And a third one, a name she didn't recognize, but the inventor line she did. Victor Hale. She set them carefully to the side. Underneath was the folder. She opened it and found the letters, 4 of them on corporate letterhead from companies she recognized by name, because you'd have to work hard not to. She read the figures, the offers, the dates. And then she found what was written in the margins, in pencil, in handwriting she had known her entire life. Megan starts school Monday. Her recital is Friday. Can't miss it. She had a nightmare last night. Can't leave. Can't leave. She sat down on the concrete floor. She hadn't planned to. Her legs simply stopped being reliable, and the floor was there, and she sat down with the folder in her lap, and the letters spread around her, and she read each margin note again slowly, one at a time. The photograph was next. She almost didn't recognize herself at first, a younger face in the man holding her, less lined, but the same hands, the same posture. He was at an airport. A little girl was asleep against his shoulder. Mouth slightly open, her hair falling across her face, one small hand gripping the collar of his jacket even in sleep. She didn't remember that flight. She had been 6 years old, and she was asleep in the photograph. But looking at the way he was holding her perfectly still, his hand steady against her back, his posture the same as it always was, she didn't need to remember it. She could see it. He wasn't going anywhere. He never had been. The bank statements came next, 6 years of them. The same amount month after month, never varying, never late. And the most recent one dated 41 days ago, drawn from a bank in Dubai. He had still been paying. Even after she told him she didn't need him. Even after she walked out and told him not to call. He had kept paying. At the bottom of the box, folded in half, was a sheet of plain white paper. My father's hand, again, not the careful block letters from the lid, but the smaller, more private script he used when he was writing for himself. Megan, I turned down $500,000 a year 4 times because you used to wake up in the middle of the night afraid I would leave the way your mother did. You were 6 years old, and you used to stand in the hallway outside your bedroom and call my name to make sure I was still there. Every single time I was. I never told you about any of this. I didn't want you to carry the weight of it. I didn't need you to be grateful. I just needed you to feel safe. That was enough for me. I hope someday it's enough for you too. Dad. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she put her hands over her face and cried in a way she hadn't since she was a child, not the controlled, careful tears from the courthouse. Not the performance of grief, but the real thing, the kind that comes from somewhere below your ribs, and doesn't ask your permission, and doesn't care who hears it. She cried for a long time. At some point, Gary came in and sat down on the floor beside her. He didn't say anything. I didn't put his arm around her, or tell her it would be okay, or do any of the things that people do when they're trying to make difficult moments easier. He just sat there close enough that she knew he was there, and that was enough. When she finally stopped, her face was hot, and her hands were cold, and the concrete floor was hard under her, and she felt scraped out and emptied, and underneath that something she couldn't quite name yet, something that was small and fragile and new. She picked up the last thing in the box. A wristwatch. Old stainless steel leather strap worn soft with years of use. The crystal had a small scratch running across the lower left corner. She turned it over. The back was plain. No inscription, no engraving. Just the smooth steel back of a watch that had been worn every day for 20 years by a man who had been there and there and there every time she needed him, and a few thousand times she hadn't known she did. She closed her fingers around it. "Gary," she said. Her voice came out wrecked and uneven, and she didn't try to fix it. He looked at her. "Did he know?" she asked. "When he gave you the box, did he know I'd eventually come?" Gary was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He hoped. That's different from knowing." He paused. "But yeah, he hoped." She looked at the watch in her hand. "I need to find somewhere that repairs watches," she said. The email from HR arrived on a Monday morning, sandwiched between a structural report from Tower 9 and a meeting request from the city planning office. I almost scrolled past it. The subject line said, "Internship Application Administrative Support Entry Level." Standard routing, the kind of thing that copies me as department head because HR copies everyone on everything. I opened it out of habit, skimmed the first line, and then stopped. Applicant name Megan Hale. I read it again. Slower. The personal statement was 3 paragraphs. Short, direct, no decoration. I am not applying for this position because of my last name. I am applying because I need to learn what real work looks like from the beginning without shortcuts. I am asking to be evaluated the same way you would evaluate anyone else who walked in off the street with no connections and no advantages. If I don't qualify, I don't qualify. But I would like the chance to find out. I sat back in my chair and read it a second time. Outside the window, Dubai was doing what it always did in April, blazing and enormous and indifferent to everything happening inside the air-conditioned towers that rose out of it. I had been here 4 months. I had learned to stop noticing the heat as a shock and start noticing it as a condition, the way you stop noticing the sound of traffic when you've lived near a highway long enough. I picked up the phone and called the head of HR. "The Hale application," I said. "Process it normally. Full standard evaluation aptitude assessment interview, the same process as every other candidate at her level." I paused. No one is to know about the family connection unless she chooses to disclose it herself. If she qualifies, she starts on Monday. If she doesn't, the answer is no. There was a brief pause on the other end. Understood, Mr. Hale. Thank you, I said, and hung up. I looked at the email for another moment. Then I closed it and went back to the structural report. She called me 3 days later. I have an interview, she said without preamble. Her voice was different from the courthouse, less raw, more contained, but still careful, the way voices are when someone is trying very hard to hold themselves together and is doing a reasonably good job of it. I heard, I said. A pause. You're not going to do anything to help. No, I said. That was the point. Another pause longer. Okay, she said finally. Okay. I just wanted to make sure you knew. I know, I said. Good luck, Megan. She was quiet for a moment. Then, thanks, Dad. I hadn't heard her say that in a long time. I didn't make anything of it. I just said goodbye and hung up and sat at my desk for a moment, with my hand still on the phone, looking at nothing in particular. She got the position. She arrived in Dubai on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of April. I knew her flight number. I had looked it up without intending to, and I knew it landed at 2:15. I did not go to the airport. I did not send a car. I had told her this was going to be the real thing, which meant it had to be the real thing from the first hour. I found out later she had taken a regular cab, gotten the address wrong twice, and arrived at her apartment, a small furnished studio I had arranged through HR at the standard intern rate. No different from what any other new hire at her level received, with 2 suitcases, and by her own account, less than $500 in her account. The next morning, she showed up at the office at 8:45. I knew because I happened to be in the lobby when she came through the main entrance. I was heading to a 7 a.m. site meeting that had run long, and I was crossing the atrium toward the elevator bank when I saw her come through the glass doors 2 minutes late. Slightly flushed from the heat, outside her hair pulled back, wearing clothes that were clean and pressed, but plainly not expensive. She didn't see me. I didn't call out to her. I watched her stop at the reception desk, give her name, receive her visitor badge, and follow the receptionist toward the HR orientation room. She walked the way she always walked when she was nervous. Chin slightly down, shoulders pulled back, like she was trying to take up less space and more space at the same time. I had noticed that about her when she was 9 years old and starting a new school, and I noticed it now. Then the elevator doors opened, and I got in, and the doors closed, and I went up to 48. That afternoon, I heard from Marcus. He stopped by my office just before 5, which he only did when he had something specific to say. He set a cup of coffee on my desk. He had started doing this, bringing 2 cups when he came by, a habit that had developed without either of us commenting on it, and sat down in the chair across from me. Your intern started today, he said. I know. She introduced herself to the admin team as Megan Hale. He picked up his cup. They'll figure out, eventually. She knew that when she applied, I said. Marcus considered this. Outside the window, the city was going gold in the late light, the glass faces of the towers catching the sun at angles that made them look briefly like something other than buildings. She wrote a good personal statement, Marcus said. I looked at him. You read it. I read all of them, he said simply. It's my company. He took a sip of coffee. She said she wanted to learn what real work looks like. From the beginning. He set the cup down. That's not nothing, Victor. No, I said. It isn't. He stood, straightened his jacket, and moved toward the door. Then he paused. She has your posture, he said. When she's nervous. He left before I could answer. I turned back to the window. Somewhere 46 floors below me in a small office she had earned herself, my daughter was finishing her first day of work. I didn't know how it had gone. I wasn't going to ask. That was the point. She told me about those first months in pieces, over several dinners, always the same way, quiet and direct, like she was reporting on someone she used to know. This is what she described. The first time her supervisor criticized her in front of the whole team, she wanted to walk out of the building and keep walking until she hit the ocean. The mistake had been simple. A data entry error in a procurement spreadsheet, 2 digits transposed in a vendor code that caused a purchase order to route to the wrong supplier. The kind of thing that happens in any office that gets caught and corrected and moved on from. But Daniel, her direct supervisor, had a policy about errors that affected external partners, and his policy was to address them immediately and in full view of whoever else was in the room. Ms. Hale. He had said her name in a way that made the other 3 people at the conference table look up from their laptops simultaneously. This vendor code. Can you walk us through what happened? Her face went hot. Her hands went cold. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded embarrassingly like her own said, "Do you know who my father is?" She caught the thought before it reached her mouth. She did not say that out loud. She explained the error. Daniel nodded, told her to correct it by end of day, and moved on. The other 3 people went back to their laptops. The meeting continued. That night, she sat in her studio apartment, staring at her phone for 20 minutes before she finally called me. I answered on the 3rd ring, sounding the way I always sound. At that hour awake, unhurried, like I had been doing something quiet, and was glad of the interruption, but wasn't going to say so. My supervisor called out my mistake in front of the whole team, she said. It wasn't fair. There was a pause, not a long one. Did you make the mistake? I asked. Yes, but did you fix it? Not yet. I was going to. Fix it tonight, I said. Go back tomorrow morning. Tell Daniel it's corrected, and tell him you've put a check in your process so it doesn't happen again. A brief pause. That's all. That's all. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. He humiliated me in front of Megan. My voice was patient and unhurried, and somehow that was worse than if I'd been firm. He did his job, now do yours. I said goodnight and hung up. She stared at the phone for a while. Then she opened the laptop and fixed the spreadsheet. It took 11 minutes. The next morning, she told Daniel it was corrected and showed him the process check she had added. He looked at it, nodded once, and said, "Good, thank you." That was all. He moved on. It was the smallest possible resolution. It was also the first time in her adult life that she had fixed something she'd broken without anyone helping her do it. Chloe Bennett found her eating lunch alone on the building's outdoor terrace about 3 weeks into her internship. She was 29 from Abu Dhabi, a project coordinator in the infrastructure division who had been at Meridian for 4 years and seemed to know everyone in the building by their first name and their coffee order. She sat down across from Megan without being invited, which startled her, and then she put her container of rice and grilled chicken on the table and said, "You're the new admin intern. I'm Chloe. You look like you're trying to become invisible, which never works on this terrace because of the light." Megan laughed before she could decide whether to. It came out rusty, like a sound she hadn't made in a while. They ate lunch together every Tuesday and Thursday after that. Chloe was the first person at Meridian who didn't know who her father was, and by the time she found out, 4 months in, when the internal newsletter ran the announcement about Megan's transition to the training program, she had already decided what she thought of her based on other things, which turned out to be the greatest gift the whole Dubai experience gave her. One afternoon in July, Chloe told her about her father. They were on the terrace again, and Chloe was talking about a trip home she'd taken over the weekend, and somewhere in the middle of it, she mentioned him, a carpenter from Abu Dhabi, 62 years old, who had worked construction sites 6 days a week for 30 years to put Chloe and her two brothers through university. "He has the roughest hands I have ever seen," Chloe said, and something in her voice shifted, became slower and more deliberate. The way voices do when someone is saying something they have thought about for a long time. "When I was young, I used to be embarrassed when he picked me up from school. I thought the other girls' fathers looked more," she searched for the word, "more like what fathers were supposed to look like." She picked up her fork, put it down again. "Now when I go home, the first thing I do is look at his hands," she said. "I think they are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Every callus is a school year. Every scar is a month of groceries." She looked at Megan directly. "I wasted a lot of time being embarrassed about something I should have been proud of from the beginning." Megan didn't say anything for a moment. She was looking at the table, and she was thinking about a garage in Seattle and oil that never quite washed out of the creases of someone's knuckles, no matter how long they scrubbed, and a camera pointed at a flannel shirt, and a voice, her voice saying, "This is my dad," in a tone that made it sound like an apology. "I understand that better than you know," Megan told her quietly. Chloe looked at her. She didn't push. That was another thing Megan had learned about her. She knew when a conversation had arrived somewhere real, and she didn't need to pick it apart. By September, small things had changed that Megan hadn't noticed changing until they were already different. She brought coffee from home in a thermos instead of buying it downstairs, because the math on 3 months of daily purchases was something she could no longer look at without feeling slightly ill. She had opened a separate savings account and set up an automatic transfer, small, not heroic, but consistent toward the balance of a loan she had only recently learned existed. She had introduced herself to the 3 senior technicians in the engineering division and asked directly and without preamble if any of them would be willing to walk her through the basics of project load management on their lunch breaks. 2 of them said yes. One of them, a 57-year-old Jordanian American named David, who had been with Meridian since the company's 2nd year, looked at her for a long moment and said, "Are you Victor Hale's daughter?" "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. "He fixed a problem in the first 2 weeks that would have cost this company $90 million. He paused. "Sit down. I'll get coffee." One afternoon, in late September, she was walking back from a site visit on the 14th floor when she passed an open doorway and saw me standing in front of a wall-sized project schematic, talking to 2 engineers she didn't recognize. I had a marker in one hand and was pointing at something in the upper left corner of the diagram, and the 2 engineers were leaning in and nodding, and I was using the same voice I had used when I helped her with calculus in high school, patient, precise, genuinely engaged with the problem. I didn't see her. She stopped for just a moment in the doorway, long enough to see what she was looking at. Then she kept walking. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel left behind. She felt for the first time in a long time like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, not because someone had put her there, but because she had found her way there herself. That felt like the beginning of something. The message came on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing schematics for the hospital wing. "Would you have dinner with me? There's a place near my office I've been going to. I found it myself. Nothing fancy, if you want." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "When Thursday, 7 o'clock. I'll send you the address." I said yes and went back to the schematics. But I sat there for a while afterward, without actually reading anything, my eyes on the page and my mind somewhere else entirely. The restaurant was a small Lebanese place on a side street 10 minutes from the Meridian offices, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus, and a guy behind the counter who knew Megan's order when she walked in, which meant she had been coming here often enough to become a regular. She was already at the table when I arrived. She had gotten there early. That was new. She looked different from the courthouse. Not just physically, though she was less hollowed out, had some color back. But in some quality of stillness, she carried now like a person who had been running for a long time and had finally figured out what pace they could sustain. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Of course," I said, and sat down. We ordered. The food came quickly: grilled chicken flatbread, a bowl of hummus that arrived with olive oil pooled in the center the way it should. We ate for a moment without talking. The comfortable kind of not talking that you can only do with someone you've known a long time, even if the knowing has had long gaps in it. Then Megan reached into her bag and placed a folded sheet of paper on the table between us. I looked at it without picking it up. "Bank statement," she said. "I set up an automatic transfer 6 weeks ago. It's not much. It won't make a dent for a long time." She kept her eyes on the paper. "But I wanted to start. Not because you need it, and not because anyone told me to. Just because it's the right thing, and I should have understood that a long time ago." I picked up the statement. The transfer amount was small, genuinely small, the amount a person pays when they are living carefully on an entry-level salary in an expensive city. But it was there. Dated. Consistent. And it was going toward the $92,000 loan with my name on it. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "I know," she said. "That's why I wanted to." I set it down. Outside, the street was doing what Dubai streets do at 7 in the evening, filling up, getting louder, the temperature finally dropping from brutal to merely warm. "Can I ask you something?" Megan said. "Go ahead." She looked at me directly the way she used to when she was 12 and working up to something honest. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the jobs? About the loan? About any of it? Even once?" I thought about how to answer that. "Because I didn't do it so you'd know," I said finally. "I did it because you needed it done. There's a difference." I picked up my coffee. "I didn't want you to feel like you owed me something. I wanted you to grow up free. Not free from things, free to become whoever you were going to become without carrying my choices as a weight on your back." Megan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "But I did carry them. I carried them wrong. I carried them as proof that you weren't enough instead of proof that you were everything." That landed somewhere deep and stayed there. "Mom called me last week," she said. Her voice changed slightly, not harder, but more careful. "Damien got 4 years. Federal sentencing was 2 weeks ago. She's been staying with her sister." A pause. "She asked me to reach out to you, to ask if there was anything you could do to help." I looked at my cup. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I couldn't speak for you." Megan met my eyes steadily. "And that she should have thought about that a long time ago." Something shifted in my chest, not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that recognized in the way she had handled that conversation the person she was becoming. "I also told her," Megan continued, her voice quieter now, "that the last time I needed someone, and they weren't there, that was me. That was my fault. And I wasn't going to do to someone else what I did to you." I didn't say anything for a moment. "That was well said," I told her. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. We sat for another hour. We talked about the project, about Dubai in October, when the heat finally breaks, about a book she had found in a used shop near her apartment. Small things. Real things. The kind of conversation you can only have when the big things have already been said and don't need to be repeated. When the check came, she reached for it before I did. "I've got it," she said. I let her. Outside on the sidewalk, we stood for a moment in the evening air, a city going about its business around us. She had her bag over her shoulder and her keys in her hand, and she looked in that particular slant of Dubai evening light, remarkably like herself. "Same time next week," she said. "Same time next week," I said. She nodded, turned, walked toward the metro station at the end of the block. I watched her go the same walk, chin slightly down, shoulders back, and then I turned in the other direction and walked back toward the office to finish the schematics. I was smiling. I didn't notice until I was halfway down the block. The video appeared on December 25th, 2024. I found it the way most people find things online. Someone forwarded it to me, in this case Marcus, who sent it with no message, attached just a link. I opened it on my laptop in my office at 11 in the evening, which was where I had been since 7 because the hospital wing deadline was 2 weeks out, and there was still too much to do. Megan was sitting in her apartment. The small one, the furnished studio on the 14th floor of the building near the metro station. She was at her desk in a plain gray sweater, her hair down, no makeup, a lamp on behind her that threw warm light across her face and left the rest of the room in shadow. She looked straight at the camera and she talked. She talked for 9 minutes. I know because I watched it twice and the timestamp didn't change. She talked about a Christmas night 2 years ago, about a garage and a flannel shirt, and a camera pointed at a man's face while hundreds of people watched. She talked about what she had believed then and what she understood now. She talked about a box in a storage unit, and letters with margin notes, and a loan she hadn't known existed. She talked about Dubai and early mornings and fixing mistakes in front of people, and what it turned out real work actually felt like. Near the end, she looked into the camera and said, "I used to think a real father was someone who could give me a luxury life. I thought that's what love looked like, comfort and ease and never having to figure anything out on your own." She paused. "I know what it looks like now. It looks like a man who turned down $500,000 a year because his daughter used to wake up in the middle of the night, afraid he'd leave. It looks like 14 hours outside an emergency room. It looks like margin notes on rejection letters." Her voice steadied on the last sentence, clear and deliberate. "It looks like my dad." I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark office for a minute. Outside, Dubai was doing what it always does, blazing and enormous and indifferent. Inside, something that had been wound tight in my chest for a very long time had come loose in a way that didn't hurt. Marcus appeared in the doorway. He had his jacket over his arm and his keys in his hand on his way out. He looked at me. "Is that your daughter?" "Yes," I said. He looked at the closed laptop, then back at me. "She sounds like you," he said. "She sounds like herself," I said. "That's better." Marcus almost smiled. He said goodnight and left. I sat there a while longer. Then I opened the laptop again, not the video, the email. I typed Megan's address, and in the body of the email I wrote 4 lines. 2 tickets to Seattle. December 23rd. The storage unit is still there if you want to bring anything back. The city looks the same. I checked. If you want to come home. I hit send before I could think about it too hard. Then I closed the laptop and picked up the hospital wing schematics and went back to work. 4 months later, in April, the Internal Meridian newsletter ran a single paragraph near the bottom of the digest, between a facilities update and a reminder about the quarterly safety training. I almost missed it. Marcus didn't. I was in my office within 20 minutes, carrying 2 cups of coffee, the way he always did when he had something specific to say. He set one on my desk, sat down across from me, and looked at me with the particular expression he reserved for things he considered significant, but didn't want to make too large. Your daughter's performance review scores, he said. They put her in the top 8% of entry-level staff evaluated this quarter. He picked up his cup. The training program has 12 spots. She earned one. I looked at my desk for a moment. She did that herself, I said. Yes, Marcus said. She did. He paused. I thought you should hear it said out loud by someone other than yourself. He left the coffee and went back to his own floor. I sat at my desk for a while after he left, not doing much of anything, just sitting there with the afternoon light coming through the window and the city going about its enormous business 48 floors below. She had earned it, not because of my name, not because of who I was, not because anyone had quietly moved pieces around on her behalf. She had shown up every morning, fixed her mistakes, asked for help when she needed it, and done the work. 6 months of ordinary, unglamorous, consistent effort, and it had been enough. It had been more than enough. I sent her a text, 3 words. I heard, well done. Her reply came 4 minutes later. Thank you. I have to go. David is teaching me load sequencing this afternoon, and I told him I'd buy the coffee. I put the phone down and went back to work. We landed in Seattle on December 23, 2025. It was raining. Of course it was raining. It's always raining in Seattle in December, and I had forgotten, in the way you forget things that are simply true about a place, how much I had missed it. Megan stepped out of the terminal beside me and looked up at the gray sky and said, I forgot how it smells here. I knew what she meant. Rain on concrete and pine and something salt adjacent that comes off the sound. It smells like the city remembering itself. We took a cab to the Elmwood neighborhood, not to my old house that lease had ended months ago, to a building 2 blocks from the complex where I had worked for 12 years, a warehouse that had been vacant since before I left for Dubai, with good bones and bad lighting, and a loading dock that Gary had been eyeing for 18 months. I had bought it in October from a distance through a property manager Sam recommended. Gary had walked the space for me a dozen times before I signed anything. He said the bones were good. I trusted Gary on bones. I hadn't told Megan what it was for. Gary was waiting at the door when we pulled up. He had a key ring in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. And when he saw Megan get out of the cab, he looked at her for a moment, with an expression I had never quite seen on his face before. The particular look of someone watching a thing resolved that they had waited a long time to see. There she is, he said. Megan walked straight to him and hugged him. Not a careful hug, a real one, the kind that takes a person by surprise. Gary's arms came up around her and he held on and cleared his throat twice before he let go. We spent 2 days converting the space. Gary had done most of the heavy work already, the electrical, the ventilation, the workshop stations along the back wall that he had built himself from reclaimed lumber. Barbara Stone showed up on the second morning with a casserole and an opinion about where the sign should go, and we listened to both. By Christmas Eve, the space looked like what it was supposed to be, a training center for older workers and single parents who needed to start over and didn't know where to begin. On the main wall, Megan hung a sign she had made herself hand-lettered on a piece of wood she had found in Gary's workshop. The letters were slightly uneven. She hadn't asked me if they were straight. A person's worth is not in what they wear or how much they earn, but in what they're willing to sacrifice when no one is watching. I read it once. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Christmas evening, after Gary and Barbara had gone home, Megan and I sat in the small back office with the space heater running and the Christmas lights Gary had strung along the workshop wall blinking through the open door. On the desk between us, roasted chicken, still warm, and an apple pie with edges that were slightly too dark. The same meal, the same imperfect pie. I looked at it and something moved through me that I didn't try to name. Megan reached under her chair and brought out a small box wrapped in red paper. The same red paper, or close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. She held it out across the desk. "I had it repaired," she said. "In Dubai. There's a place near the metro station that does watch restoration. The guy who owns it has been doing it for 40 years. He said the movement was still perfect." I unwrapped it slowly. The watch looked the way it had always looked: stainless steel, case, leather strap, the small scratch across the lower left corner of the crystal still there, because she had asked them to leave it. I turned it over. The back had been engraved, "To my real father." I held it for a long time, without putting it on. My throat was very tight, and my hands were not entirely steady, and I was 63 years old and sitting in a converted warehouse in the rain in Seattle. And I did not try to make any of that smaller than it was. Then Megan leaned across the desk and rested her head on my shoulder. Not carefully, not tentatively. The way she used to when she was 6 years old, and the world was large and frightening, and I was the thing between her and all of it. Outside, rain on the roof, the Christmas lights blinking through the doorway. Gary's tools lined up along the workshop wall, ready for the first class on Monday morning. I put the watch on. So that's my story. I spent 15 years in silence, believing love didn't need to be seen to be real. I was wrong. Not about the love, about the silence. Don't be like I was. Don't sacrifice everything and expect people to see it without being shown. If we tell them nothing, someone else will fill that silence with lies. I learned that the hard way, and by God's grace, I got a second chance that not everyone receives. These family stories, revenge, aren't about getting even. The real revenge is becoming who you were always meant to be. In every family drama revenge story, the wound is never the ending, the healing is. And in every family drama revenge moment, I've lived through what mattered most wasn't winning. It was the truth finally coming home. I lost 2 years with my daughter to pride. I got them back. Not because I fought, because I finally stood still long enough to let her find me. If these family stories, revenge, touched something real in you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end. Heads up, some stories on this channel blend real emotion with fictional elements built to make you think, not to mislead. If that's not your thing, no hard feelings. Choose what speaks to you.